$1 trillion corporation, one man, and a file smaller than a photo on your phone. In February of this year, a software developer named Pete Batard sat down and typed something on GitHub that stopped the technology world cold. He wasn't sending a legal letter. He wasn't filing a lawsuit. He was simply telling the truth, at least what he believed to be the truth, in plain language for anyone to read. He said he was pretty sure Microsoft had paid one of their own employees to deliberately break his tool, to find a way to kill it, and then quietly implement that sabotage on their own servers. Microsoft said nothing. They have never responded. Not once. Now, here's what you need to understand before we go any further. The file this trillion-dollar company allegedly went after, it weighs 1.9 megabytes. That is smaller than most photos sitting in your phone right now. The operating system Microsoft sells, Windows 11, weighs approximately 6 gigabytes. That means this one man's file is roughly 3,000 times smaller than the product of the most powerful software company on Earth. And according to over 200 million people, more than the entire population of Brazil, it works better. But why would Microsoft care? Why would a company worth more than the GDP of most countries spend resources trying to destroy a tiny free tool built by a single developer who has never charged anyone a single penny? The answer to that question involves hundreds of millions of computers, a hardware requirement that conveniently made billions of dollars for manufacturers, and a pattern of corporate behavior that has now repeated itself not once, not twice, but 3 deliberate times. Stay with me. Because what you are about to hear is not just a tech story. It is a story about who actually controls the computer sitting in your home, you or the company that sold you the software to run it. Let's start at the beginning because this story has roots that go back further than most people realize. December 2011. Pete Batard, a French software developer, releases a small free tool. He calls it Rufus. The name is an acronym. Reliable USB formatting utility with source. Not a glamorous name. Not a marketing name. A name that tells you exactly what it does and nothing more. Before Rufus existed, if you wanted to create a bootable USB drive, the kind of drive that lets you install or repair an operating system, your options were limited, clunky, and mostly required you to install yet another piece of corporate software first. Batard built something different. Free, open source, no installation required. You download it, you run it, you are done. For its first decade, Rufus lived quietly in the world of IT professionals. System administrators kept it on a USB stick in their desk drawer. Repair technicians used it to rebuild broken machines. Linux enthusiasts used it to install alternative operating systems. It was respected. It was useful. It was completely uncontroversial. Then, in the summer of 2021, Microsoft made an announcement that would transform Rufus from a niche technical utility into something used by hundreds of millions of ordinary people. And here is where the story gets interesting, because what Microsoft announced had a security justification that was technically real. But what it did to ordinary computer owners was something else entirely. And you need to understand both sides of that to understand why this fight matters. Here is what Microsoft said. Windows 11, their new operating system, would require something called TPM 2.0, a trusted platform module, a small security chip built into newer computer motherboards. The chip handles encryption, it verifies your system hasn't been tampered with, it provides a layer of hardware-level protection against certain kinds of attacks. Security researchers, independent ones with no financial interest in the outcome, largely agreed TPM 2.0 is a genuinely useful security feature. Microsoft wasn't lying about the security benefits. That part was real. But here's what was also real. Computers manufactured before roughly 2017 or 2018, millions and millions of perfectly good, perfectly functional machines either didn't have this chip at all or had an older version that didn't meet the new requirement. Microsoft built a little tool called the PC Health Check that let you scan your own computer. And for an estimated 240 to 400 million people, that tool came back with the same answer. Your computer is not eligible for Windows 11. Not broken, not slow, not failing, just ineligible. Microsoft's official solution was simple and remarkably convenient. Buy new hardware, or stay on Windows 10 until its support ended, which they announced would be October 2025. Now remember that number, 400 million computers, because it becomes the entire engine of this story. Pete Batard looked at that situation, hundreds of millions of people being told their working computers had no upgrade path, and he built a solution. He added a feature to Rufus that bypassed the hardware checks entirely during a Windows 11 installation. How? By replacing the file responsible for running those checks with an empty version, a blank, a nothing. The installer would look for the TPM check, find an empty file, and have nothing to execute against. The machine would pass. Windows 11 would install. Clean, stable, no drama. A machine Microsoft had officially declared incompatible could now run their operating system in 4 clicks. That feature launched, it worked, and it quietly spread. Because the internet roots around obstacles and several hundred million people with the deadline approaching had a very clear motivation to find a solution. But Microsoft was paying attention. In October 2024, Microsoft released what they called a major update, Windows 11 24H2. Built into that update, quietly, without fanfare or announcement, was a change. They had hardened the installer to detect the empty file trick. If it found the blank file Rufus was using, it stopped. It refused to proceed. Users who had been successfully running Windows 11 on unsupported hardware found themselves locked out of the major annual update. Round 1 to Microsoft, or so they thought. Batard's response was measured but swift. Within days, he had identified a new method, a set of registry adjustments that achieved the same result through a completely different technical pathway. Future versions of Rufus were updated to apply those adjustments automatically. Users wouldn't need to do anything differently. The bypass was restored. And this is the moment where you should start to see the structural problem Microsoft faces. They had to anticipate every possible bypass and block each one. Batard only had to find one they hadn't thought of. The mathematics of that situation favor the defender, not the attacker. And in this case, the attacker was the trillion-dollar company. Round 2 to Batard. Then came February 2026. And this time, what Microsoft allegedly did was different, more targeted, more personal. And it is what drove Batard to post publicly on GitHub and say, in plain language, what he believed was really happening. Rufus includes a feature called Fido. It's a PowerShell script written entirely by Batard himself that automates the process of downloading Windows installation files directly from Microsoft's own servers. No navigating Microsoft's download pages, no using Microsoft's own media creation tool, just Rufus, Fido, and the file you need. In February 2026, users began reporting that those downloads were failing. Error codes, blocked IP addresses, silence. Batard investigated and posted what he found. In his own words, the script was being detected, which he acknowledged wasn't difficult since it's open source, anyone can read it. But, he wrote, it does require active, intentional involvement from Microsoft to break the downloads. And then he said the thing that made global technology news. He was pretty sure Microsoft had paid someone, one of their own employees, to figure out a specific way to break the Fido download script and then implement that on their servers. This was not a bug. This was not a coincidence. This was the third time Rufus had been specifically and deliberately targeted. Think about what that means for a moment. Microsoft did not block Rufus, the application. They didn't send a legal letter. They didn't file a copyright claim because they can't, and we'll come back to why in just a moment. Instead, they blocked a PowerShell script, their own scripting language, accessing their own servers to download files they make publicly available. They made it harder for their own customers to get their own software in order to stop a tool that helps people use that software more freely. That is the level to which they felt compelled to go. And now you need to understand why they cannot simply end this, legally, technically, or otherwise. Because this is the part of the story the tech press mostly glosses over. Rufus is open source. Every single line of code is public. Anyone in the world can read it, copy it, modify it, and redistribute it under the GNU General Public License, one of the most legally battle-tested open source licenses ever written. Microsoft has no copyright claim over a USB formatting utility. They have no patent on the concept of bypassing a hardware requirement check. Rufus does not distribute Windows. It does not include a single byte of Microsoft intellectual property. It is a tool that creates bootable media from files you already own the license for. There is no lawsuit available to them. There is no takedown notice that would hold up. There is no legal mechanism that reaches this file. And the open source nature of the code means that when Microsoft makes a change to block a Rufus method, the entire community of developers watching that code base can see exactly what changed, reverse engineer what happened, and begin working on a fix before Batard has even finished reading the change logs. That's precisely what happened in 2022 when Microsoft first hardened their download systems. Community developers found the workaround. Batard patched it. The fix always comes. That is not a boast. It is a structural feature of how open source software works when there is a motivated community behind it. Microsoft is playing a game where the rules are stacked against them, and the reason they keep playing it anyway tells you everything about what is actually at stake. Let's be honest about something the technology press often dances around. Microsoft is a company with legitimate security goals. TPM 2.0 provides genuine protection. None of that is fabricated, but Microsoft is also a company with a very clear commercial interest in hardware renewal cycles. When hundreds of millions of computers need to be replaced, that is good for the companies that make hardware. And the companies that make hardware are part of the same ecosystem that Microsoft has built its business on for decades. Those two things, a real security feature and a commercially convenient deadline, are not mutually exclusive. They can both be true simultaneously, and the pattern of behavior that followed suggests the second motive was at least as powerful as the first. Consider what the technology writer Jorge Aguilar described in one of the most widely read tech publications in the English-speaking world. His laptop had a 7th-generation Intel processor, plenty of memory, a graphics card capable of running modern software, by any practical measure, a capable working machine. Microsoft's tool told him it was incompatible, not because it was broken, not because it was slow, because a specific security chip wasn't there. He described the feeling of being told to replace a perfectly functional computer simply to meet requirements that felt, in his word, arbitrary. He is not an exception. He is one of 240 to 400 million people who paid for their computers, maintained them, updated them, and were then told by the company that makes the operating system that their hardware was no longer adequate. For a significant portion of those people, particularly older users, people on fixed incomes, people in communities where hardware isn't easily replaced, the practical answer was Rufus. Not because they were technically sophisticated, Most of them were not, but because the internet pointed them toward it, and the graphical interface required no technical knowledge at all. And the deadline was real. October 2025, Windows 10 support ended. Those machines were now running an unsupported operating system. Every day that passed without a solution was a day of increased security risk. The tool Microsoft was actively working to break was simultaneously the thing preventing the largest forced hardware replacement cycle in the history of personal computing, and millions of people knew it. Now, here is the question we haven't asked yet, and it's the one that keeps me up at night when I think about this story. If one developer with no funding, no team, no corporate backing can maintain this fight against the world's most powerful software company across 15 years and 3 deliberate sabotage attempts, what does that tell us about every other restriction buried in the software running on your machine right now? We're going to pick up that thread in a future video, and what we found may be more uncomfortable than anything in this one. But first, the conclusion to the story, because there's a dimension to it that almost no one is talking about. Pete Batard's GitHub profile describes him as a free software developer. 15 years, $0 charged, more than 200 million downloads, 3 deliberate blocks by the largest software company in the world, 3 fixes, each one arriving before the dust had settled. He has never taken a corporate dollar. He has never monetized the tool. He has never been acquired, absorbed, or co-opted. He built something that serves people, and he has kept it working at personal cost, time, expertise, the ongoing pressure of being targeted by $1 trillion company for a decade and a half. And here is what that asymmetry should tell you. We live in an era where most people assume that corporate scale means corporate victory, that the bigger the company, the more inevitable its control, that there is no practical recourse when a Microsoft or a Google or an Amazon decides something should be a certain way on your device. Rufus is evidence that this assumption is wrong, not in some abstract, theoretical sense, in the most concrete and measurable way possible. 200 million times wrong. That is how many people found a different path. Not through protest, not through legislation, through a 1.9 megabyte file maintained by a man who simply refused to stop. Now, the security argument Microsoft makes is real, and it deserves honest engagement. Hardware-backed security is genuinely better than software-only security. TPM 2.0 does provide protection that older chips cannot. A world in which everyone is running modern, verified hardware is probably a more secure world. But the question was never whether TPM 2.0 was a good idea. The question was whether it was appropriate to implement a good idea in a way that stranded hundreds of millions of paying customers, created a hardware replacement crisis on a global scale, and then, when a single developer built a peaceful technical solution to respond with what appears to be 3 deliberate acts of sabotage, none of which Microsoft has acknowledged or explained, that is a company that has confused its security goals with its commercial interests and lost the ability to tell the difference between them. And that confusion has a cost. Not to Microsoft's stock price, to the people who own the machines. The 70-year-old in Ohio whose laptop was flagged as incompatible. The retired teacher in Yorkshire whose computer runs perfectly but can't get a security update. The pensioner in Toronto who was told, in effect, that the device they paid for no longer met the requirements of the company that sold them the software to run it. For those people, and there are hundreds of millions of them, Rufus is not a technical workaround, it is a statement. A quiet 1.9 megabyte statement that says, this machine still belongs to you. Pete Batard charged nothing. He asked for nothing. He has simply kept the file working. 1 developer, 1 accusation. A $1 trillion corporation that said nothing in response. And 200 million downloads that said everything.